there is a specific kind of morning that doesn't announce itself. No fanfare, no thunder, no divine light splitting through the curtains like a biblical scene. It comes quietly, almost insultingly ordinary. The alarm goes off, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe you just open your eyes at a strange hour, 3 a.m. or 4 a.m., that sacred twitching window where the veil between who you were and who you are meant to be grows paper thin. And in that silence, something shifts. Something inside you, something ancient and unmovable, finally gets tired of waiting. Tired of being suppressed. Tired of being polite. Tired of shrinking itself into shapes that make other people comfortable. And from that moment forward, you are not the same person who closed their eyes the night before. You woke up, not metaphorically, not in the self-help book sense. You woke up in the way the saints and warriors and every person who has ever changed the world has woken up with the bone-deep, soul-level understanding that you were never meant to be ordinary, that you were placed here, in this body, in this lifetime, with a purpose so specific and so powerful that the entire universe conspired to make sure you survived long enough to realize it. That morning, that quiet, unremarkable, earth-shattering morning is when you became their worst nightmare. Part on Northeast. What it means to be the chosen on Northeast. Let's talk about what chosen actually means, because the world has distorted this concept in recognition. Pop culture wants you to believe the chosen one is born with glowing eyes and supernatural powers, that destiny arrives on a silver platter wrapped in prophecy. Spiritual communities sometimes weaponize the term, using it to create hierarchies of worthiness, to gatekeep enlightenment, to make some people feel cosmically special, while leaving others feeling abandoned by the universe. None of that is what we are talking about here. Being chosen is not about being better than others. It is not a title given to the privileged few who get to coast through life on divine favoritism. Being chosen is a responsibility. It is a weight. It is a calling that most people will spend their entire lives running away from, because the full scope of what it requires is terrifying. To be chosen means to be called toward your high self with such insistence, such relentless spiritual pressure, that ordinary life becomes impossible to sustain. It means the mediocre path is physically, emotionally, spiritually painful to walk. It means you feel a constant, low-grade burning in your chest whenever you betray your true purpose. It means you were built for something that most people cannot see yet. And that invisibility, that gap between what you know you are and what the world currently acknowledges, is the crucible in which your character is forged. Part 2. The signs you dismissed as weak Northeast SS. For years, maybe decades, you carried signs of your calling and interpreted them as flaws. Think about this carefully. You were always too intense. People told you that. Too sensitive, too serious, too obsessed, too in your head. You felt things more deeply than the people around you, and you learned to apologize for that depth. You were told you were dramatic when you were actually perceptive. You were told you were unrealistic when you were actually visionary. You were labeled difficult when you were actually principled. You couldn't fit into the boxes they built for you. And instead of recognizing that the boxes were too small, you spent enormous amounts of energy trying to compress yourself into spaces your spirit was never designed to inhabit. You felt the loneliness of being misunderstood so frequently and so thoroughly that you began to wonder if something was fundamentally broken inside you. You questioned your own mind. You questioned your instincts. You looked around at people who seem to move through life with frictionless ease, accepting the ordinary, settling into comfortable numbness, and you wondered why you couldn't do the same, why contentment felt like slow suffocation to you, why silence made you restless and noise made you exhausted, why you grieved things other people shrugged off, and felt electric about things other people found boring. Those weren't malfunctions, those were calibrations. Your nervous system was tuned to a different frequency from the start, because the work you are here to do requires a different kind of instrument. Part 3: The Years of Being Underground. Every chosen one has a chapter that looks, from the outside, like failure, a period of invisibility, a season of descending rather than rising. This is the part no one talks about, because it is uncomfortable and it doesn't make for inspiring highlight reels. But it is perhaps the most important part of the entire journey. The underground years, the years of confusion, of working in obscurity, of feeling like you are going nowhere while everyone around you seems to be moving forward, are not wasted years. They are the years where the roots grow, and you cannot understand the tree without understanding the roots. In nature, the most towering trees have root systems that extend as far underground as the tree extends above it. The ancient oak that has survived centuries of storms, its visible glory, is matched exactly by its invisible foundation. The chosen one's underground years are the root-growing years. These are the years where character is built without an audience, where discipline is tested without reward, where faith is demanded without evidence, where you are asked to keep going, keep building, keep learning, keep becoming without any external validation confirming that what you are doing matters. Most people cannot survive this season. Most people interpret the silence as a sign that they were wrong about themselves. They abandon the calling. They choose comfort over truth. And in doing so, they trade their destiny for relief. You did not. Or if you wavered, and most people waver, something in you kept pulling you back. Part 4: Why the Northeast. EDD you to stay small. Now we must talk about something the most spiritual teachers gloss over because it is uncomfortable to say plainly. There are people in your life and structures in this world that have a vested interest in your smallness. This is not conspiracy. This is not paranoia. This is physics. Systems maintain themselves. Hierarchies preserve themselves. People who have built their identity, their sense of safety, their social position around a version of you that is manageable, predictable, and unthreatening, those people will feel existentially unsettled when you begin to expand. This is not always malicious. Sometimes the people who try to keep you small love you genuinely. They are operating from fear, their own unexamined fear, that your growth will leave them behind, that your power will reveal their dormancy, that your awakening will disrupt the equilibrium they have organized their life around. The person who calls you arrogant when you begin to speak with confidence is not necessarily your enemy. They are a mirror. They are showing you exactly what they have suppressed in themselves. The friend who suddenly becomes critical when your work begins to gain momentum is not evil. They are scared. They looked at you and thought, if you can't do that, then I have no excuse. And that thought, that confrontation with their own unliked potential, is so painful that the ego redirects the discomfort outward at you. But there is another category. Beyond the fearful ones, there are those who are genuinely threatened by your light, not because they love you, but because your awakening disrupts their power. These are the people who build systems that depend on you doubting yourself. Part 5: the nightmare you became. So what does it mean that you became their worst nightmare? Let's be precise about this. You didn't become a nightmare by becoming cruel. You didn't become a nightmare by becoming vengeful or aggressive or destructive. You became a nightmare by becoming undeniable, by becoming someone who can no longer be gasped into abandoning your own perception, by becoming someone whose confidence is no longer contingent on their approval, by becoming someone who does not need their validation to take up space, to speak their truth, to pursue their vision. The nightmare of a controlling person is someone who cannot be controlled. The nightmare of a manipulator is someone who sees the manipulation clearly and is unbothered by it. The nightmare of a system built on your insecurity is someone who has healed that insecurity. The nightmare of mediocrity is excellence that refuses to apologize for itself. When you woke up, truly woke up, you stopped being the person they could rely on to second-guess yourself at the critical moment. You stopped being the person who would back down when things got uncomfortable. You stopped being the person who could be silenced by a raised eyebrow, a cold shoulder, a withdrawal of approval. And for people who had learned to manage you through those tools, that shift was catastrophic. You became unmanageable, not in the chaos sense, in the sovereignty sense. You became a person who manages themselves, who answers to their own conscience, who derives their sense of worth from an eternal source that no one outside of you can reach or revoke. Part 6. The Spiritual Architect Chord. You're of a Washington KNING. Let us go deeper into the metaphysics of this, because the awakening of a chosen one is not merely a psychological event. It is a spiritual reorganization of the entire self. Every major spiritual tradition in human history has a concept for this moment. In Christianity, it is the death and resurrection, the old self crucified, so the true self can rise. In Buddhism, it is the dissolution of the false self, the ego's structure that was built to survive in a world that didn't understand you, finally releasing its grip. In Islam, it is the concept of the nafs, the purification of the lower self, so the higher self can operate without obstruction. In indigenous traditions across every continent, there is the vision quest, the deliberate descent into darkness, into aloneness, into stripped-back reality, so that the individual can receive their true name, their true purpose, their true power. What all of these traditions are pointing at is the same phenomenon, a point in the journey where the constructed self, the self built from survival, from people-pleasing, from fear, from the need to be loved and accepted, can no longer sustain itself. It collapses, not because you failed, because it succeeded at its job. It got you here. It kept you alive through the years when you didn't know who you were. And now, having served its purpose, it makes way for something more essential, more real, more you. This is the awakening. This is the moment you look in the mirror and see not the person you were trained to be, but the person you actually are. Part 7. The law north, east, north, east. Assess of the ascent. We must speak honestly about the loneliness, because no one warns you about this part, and it catches almost everyone off guard. When you begin to rise, truly rise, not just succeed by external metrics, but genuinely ascend into your higher self, the landscape of your relationships changes. Some people will grow with you. These are the rare and precious ones, the souls who are on their own path of becoming, who celebrate your expansion because they understand it is not a threat, but an inspiration. Hold these people close. They are sacred. But others, people you love, people you have known for years, People who are woven into the fabric of your history will not grow with you, not because they are bad people, not because the love was not real, but because you are moving in a direction that requires you to let go of the version of yourself that the relationship was built around. And some relationships cannot survive that evolution. This is one of the great unspoken costs of the awakening. The chosen one path is not the path of gathering. In its ascending phases, it is often the path of releasing old identities, releasing relationships that are rooted in your smallness, releasing communities that celebrated your limitation and feel threatened by your growth, releasing the version of your own story where you were the victim, the overlooked one, the person who tried and was told it wasn't enough. That story served you once. It gave you the fuel of resentment and the solidarity of shared struggle. But it is no longer true, and carrying it forward will anchor you to a reality you have already outgrown. Part 8. What the universe, accord UALLY, does for the chosen Northeast. Here is something that sounds fantastical until you have lived it, and then it sounds like the most obvious thing in the world. When you align with your true purpose, when you stop resisting the calling and actually step into it fully, the universe begins to move on your behalf in ways that are impossible to explain rationally. Doors open that you didn't knock on. People appear in your life at the exact moment you need them, carrying exactly the knowledge or resource or connection you require. Obstacles that seemed immovable suddenly shift. Opportunities emerge from directions you weren't even looking. This is not magic in the supernatural sense. It is coherence. When your actions, your thoughts, your energy, and your purpose are all pointed in the same direction, when the noise of fear and the static of other people's expectations are no longer distorting your signal, you become extraordinarily effective. You begin to move through the world with a fluidity that looks effortless from the outside, but is actually the result of profound inner alignment. The chosen one doesn't receive special treatment from the universe because they are special. They receive it because they are finally operating in accordance with their design. It's like a key finally finding the lock it was made for. The turning isn't magic, it's just feet. Part 9. Northeast, the discipline Northeast, behind the divinity. Let us be very clear about something, because the spiritual framing of this conversation can sometimes obscure a practical truth. The awakening is only the beginning. It is the ignition, not the engine. The chosen one path, for all its spiritual dimension, is built on discipline, on daily practice, on choosing every single day to show up for the version of yourself that you caught a glimpse of in the awakening, and to do the unglamorous work of building a life that is actually commensurate with that vision. This means the mornings when you don't feel inspired, you still show up. This means the weeks when progress is invisible, you still keep moving. This means when old habits and old fears creep back in, as they inevitably do, because the ego doesn't die quietly, you meet them with compassion rather than judgment. Acknowledge them, and choose differently anyway. The spiritual and the practical are not opposites, they are partners. Your meditation feeds your clarity. Your clarity feeds your decisions. Your decisions feed your results. Your results feed your faith. Your faith feeds your discipline. It is a cycle that builds on itself, that compounds over time, that turns the person who woke up that ordinary morning into someone who 3 years, 5 years, a decade later is genuinely unrecognizable from who they once were. Not because they were transformed by some external force, but because they kept choosing. day after day, to transform themselves. Part 10: The North, East Mice Within. We have talked about the external forces that try to keep you small. But the most dangerous opposition to the chosen one's journey is not external, it is internal. The real enemies are not the people who doubted you or the systems that excluded you. The real enemies live inside your own mind, wearing the faces of people you trusted, speaking in the voice of your own most intimate fears. Self-doubt is the first enemy, not the productive kind of doubt that keeps you humble and encourages you to question and refine. That kind of doubt is an ally. The destructive kind, the kind that strikes at your most vulnerable moments, that whispers at 2 a.m. that you are deluded, that everyone else can see what you refuse to admit, that you mistook ambition for purpose and ego for calling. This voice is ancient. It is the internalized voice of every person who ever told you to be realistic. Every rejection that felt like confirmation of your worst fear about yourself. Every moment you tried and fell short and let the falling define the trying. You must learn to recognize this voice without being governed by it. To hear it, acknowledge its fear, and choose not to obey it. The second enemy is comfort, not rest. Rest is sacred and necessary. Comfort, the seductive, kind, perfectly temperature-controlled numbness of a life that is safe but small. Comfort is the enemy of growth because it doesn't announce itself as an enemy. It presents as a reward. You worked hard, you deserve ease. You've been through so much, you deserve to stop pushing. And some of that is true. But the chosen one must learn to distinguish between the rest that restores and the comfort that corrodes. Part 11: How they see you now. Something has shifted in how the people around you experience you. Can you feel it? There is a new kind of attention in their eyes when you enter a room. It is not always warmth. Sometimes it is weariness. Sometimes it is the strange cocktail of admiration and resentment that powerful people always inspiring those who haven't yet claimed their own power. But regardless of its flavor, the attention itself is new because you carry yourself differently now. Not arrogantly. Arrogance is the performance of confidence by someone who doesn't actually have it. You carry yourself with something quieter and more powerful than arrogance. You carry yourself with presence, with the particular groundedness of someone who knows who they are, what they are for, and why they are in the room. This is magnetic in a way that is almost impossible to fake, because people can't feel the difference between performed confidence and earned centeredness. They may not be able to articulate what changed about you. They may say you seem different, that there is something about you now that wasn't there before. What they are sensing is alignment. The gap between who you were presenting yourself as and who you actually are has narrowed, and people respond to that gap closing in profound ways, drawn toward it, or, if they are deeply committed to their own performance, threatened by it. Both responses are appropriate. Both responses are, in their way, a kind of tribute. Part 12: The Power of Refusal. One of the most underrated superpowers of the awakened chosen one is the power of refusal. The ability to say no clearly, without excessive explanation, without drowning the no in apology, is one of the most profound spiritual acts available to a human being. For most of your life, you probably struggled with this, saying yes when you meant no, accepting what was offered, rather than asking for what was deserved, staying in situations, relationships, environments that drained your energy and diminished your spirit because the alternative, the confrontation, the disappointment, The possibility of abandonment felt worse than the quiet suffering of compliance. The awakening changes your relationship to the word no, not because you become callous or indifferent to others, but because you finally understand that every yes to something that dishonors you is a no to something that would fulfill you. Your time, your energy, your attention, these are not infinite resources to be distributed without discernment. They are the raw material of your purpose, and how you allocate them is one of the most consequential decisions you make every single day. When you learn to refuse what doesn't belong in your life, not with bitterness but with clarity, not with drama but with finality, you create the space that your true calling needs to grow into. The refusals are not withdrawals from life. They are investments in the life that is actually meant for you. Part 13. The mission BMES clear. At some point in the awakening, and it is different for everyone. Some experience it as a sudden clarity, others as a gradual crystallization. The mission comes into focus, not just a vague sense of purpose, but something specific, something you can name, something that when you say it out loud for the first time, feels both utterly obvious and profoundly terrifying, because the mission of a chosen one is almost always bigger than what the conditioned self believes it is capable of. It involves other people in a significant way. It involves service in some form, not the self-abnegating, martyr-style service that erases the self, but the kind of service that expresses the full power of who you are in a way that creates genuine value in the world. It might be art that changes how people see themselves. It might be leadership that transforms the organizations or communities it touches. It might be healing in the clinical sense or the informal sense, the kind of healing that happens in a conversation, in a story, in a room where someone finally feels seen. It might be building something that solves a problem that has been left unsolved too long, or saying something that needed to be said by someone who had earned the right to say it through the depth of their experience. Whatever it is, and you either know what it is, or you are moving toward knowing it is yours. It was specifically assigned to you, and the world will be measurably less because of its absence if you choose comfort over calling. Part 14. The Blood of the North is Why. The title of this video contains a blood drop, and is there for a reason. The chosen one path is not bloodless. It asks for something from you, not literally, but in the metaphorical sense that every major spiritual tradition uses blood to signify the sacrifice, the cost, the price of becoming. There are things you will have to leave behind. There are relationships that will end, not because you are a bad person or a cold one, but because you are committed to your evolution, and not all relationships can survive your evolution. There are versions of yourself you will have to grieve, the version that wanted to be liked by everyone, the version that measured their worth by others' approval. The version that kept themselves small to maintain the peace. Grieving these selves is real work. It is not weakness to mourn who you were. It is honesty. It is respect for the journey. There are comfortable lies you will have to release in favor of uncomfortable truths about yourself, about the people in your life, about the systems you participate in. Seeing clearly is not always pleasant. The chosen one path does not allow you to stay comfortable in your illusions because the mission requires clear sight, and clear sight requires a willingness to look at what is actually there rather than what you wish were there. All of this costs something, but here is the truth that carries you through the cost. What you receive in exchange is worth more than what you release. You trade the false security of a small life for the terrifying freedom of a large one. Part 15. Accord. IVATING. Your full power. You have been operating at a fraction of your capacity. This is not a criticism. It is just the truth. And naming it is the first step toward changing it. The fears, the conditioning, the years of being told to be smaller, all of it has been acting as a governor on your engine, limiting the output of what is actually an extraordinarily powerful system. The activation, the process of releasing those governors and operating at fuller capacity is what the awakening initiates. But initiation is not completion. You must actively participate in the activation. This means doing the inner work that most people outsource or avoid, the therapeutic work of understanding where your wounds come from, not to wallow in them, but to stop being unconsciously governed by them. It means building physical practices that honor the body as the vessel of your purpose, not because aesthetics matter more than substance, but because the quality of your physical energy directly impacts the quality of your thinking, your creativity, your emotional regulation, and your capacity to show up fully for the work. It means building a mind that is both sharp enough to navigate complexity and still enough to receive intuition, the two hemispheres of the chosen one's intelligence, reason and revelation, working in concert. It means developing a spiritual practice that is not performative but genuinely nourishing, whether that is meditation, prayer, time in nature, creative practice, physical movement done in a meditative state, something that reconnects you daily to the source of your knowing. Part 16. The frequency of the chosen. Everything in the universe vibrates. Everything is frequency. This is not metaphor, it is physics. And consciousness, being part of the universe, is no exception. The chosen one in the awakened state operates at a frequency that is simply incompatible with certain kinds of people, certain kinds of environments, certain kinds of content, conversation, and experience. This is why the awakening often comes with a simultaneous and sometimes disorienting pruning of social life and environmental exposure. Suddenly the party that would have entertained you for hours feels unbearable after 30 minutes. Suddenly the conversations that used to feel normal, the gossip, the complaint loops, the mutual reinforcement of small thinking feel like they are literally draining your energy, because they are. Suddenly the media, the entertainment, the ambient noise of the culture that once washed over you without consequence begins to feel like interference. You are not becoming a snob. You are not becoming antisocial. You are becoming protective of your frequency. You are learning, with increasing clarity, what raises your vibration and what lowers it, what feeds your mission and what depletes it. And you are, perhaps for the first time in your life, making choices based on that discernment, rather than based on social expectation, habit, or the fear of seeming difficult. This is one of the quietest and most profound expressions of the awakening, the daily and glamorous practice of choosing frequency. Part 17. For those who, Washington, NT to break you again. There will be attempts, even after the awakening, even after you have done the work, built the foundation, found your footing in your true self. There will be moments, situations, and people that seem designed to pull you back into the smallness you left behind. A particularly cutting piece of criticism that lands on an old wound, a sudden failure that the self-doubt machine immediately uses as evidence that you were always wrong about yourself, a relationship crisis that activates the old fear of abandonment and makes you want to contort yourself back into shapes feed other people's comfort zones. These moments are not evidence that the awakening wasn't real or that you haven't actually changed. They are tests, not in the punitive Jupiter sense, but in the metallurgical sense, the testing of metal under heat to confirm its strength. What the universe is asking in these moments is, do you know who you are when knowing is hard? Do you hold your center when the pressure to abandon it is most intense? Do you trust what you saw in the awakening when the fog of fear tries to make you doubt your own vision? The answer is not always yes immediately. Sometimes you falter, sometimes the old patterns resurface and you spend a day, a week, a season the familiar weight of the smaller self. That is not failure. That is part of the process. The measure of the chosen one is not that they never fall back, it is that they always return. Part 18. The legacy you are building. Zoom out for a moment, way out. See your life not as a series of days and decisions, but as a story that extends backward into the ancestors who carried the seeds of your calling in their bloodline and forward into the lips your work will touch. The people who will be shaped by what you create. The world that will be different because you lived in it and did what you were sent here to do. The chosen one does not build for themselves alone. This is perhaps the most critical distinction between ambition and purpose. Ambition is fundamentally self-serving. It is about acquiring, achieving, ascending. Purpose is fundamentally relational. It is about contributing, connecting, creating something that lives beyond the self. When you operate from purpose, you tap into a motivational energy that is simply not available to ambition, because ambition runs on ego-fueled praise, achievement, status, accumulation, and ego fuel is finite. It runs out, it burns bright, and then it burns out. But purpose runs on a different fuel entirely. Purpose runs on meaning, on love, on the bone-deep satisfaction of doing what you were made to do, of contributing in the way only you can contribute, of seeing your word, whatever form it takes, land in the world and make something better. That fuel does not run out. If anything, it compounds. The more you feed it, the more it generates. The more you give, the more you find to give. This is the economy of purpose, and it operates by completely different rules than the economy of acquisition.